When Jack Elam passed away in 2003, Hollywood lost one of its most unforgettable faces, and his closest friend, Clint Walker, was nowhere to be seen. For fans who grew up watching their westerns, that absence felt strange, even painful. People whispered, speculated, and searched for answers. After all, Clint and Jack weren't just co-stars, they were brothers in spirit. But behind Clint's quiet decision was a story of heartbreak, frailty, and a friendship tested by time and tragedy. The unlikely friendship. Before fame, before the cowboy hats and movie sets, Clint Walker and Jack Elam came from worlds that couldn't have been more different. Clint, born Norman Eugene Walker in Hartford, Illinois in 1927, was a man of order and discipline. He stood 6'6", broad-shouldered, soft-spoken, and carved from the old American mold of strength and decency. Jack Elam, born 7 years earlier in 1920 in a dusty mining town called Miami, Arizona, was the opposite in almost every way. He was scrappy, quick-witted, and mischievous, the kind of man who turned his hardships into humor. Jack's early life was marked by loss and pain. His mother died when he was just 4, and at 11, a boyhood fight left him blind in one eye, a wound that would have ended most dreams before they began. Yet that same injury gave Jack the lazy eye that would later make him one of Hollywood's most recognizable villains. He worked as an accountant before Hollywood noticed him, then switched paths after doctors warned that the strain could leave him fully blind. By the late 1940s, he had turned what should have been a misfortune into a calling. Clint Walker's rise was more structured. After serving in the Merchant Marine and working odd jobs, he was discovered by an agent who saw potential in his commanding presence. Soon, he became a household name as Cheyenne Bodie, the stoic, honorable cowboy on Cheyenne, 1955 to 1963. Jack, meanwhile, was building his career playing outlaws and drifters on shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza. Their paths crossed in 1966 on The Night of the Grizzly, a western that would bring together two men from opposite ends of the genre, the noble hero and the cunning comic sidekick. What began as a simple collaboration soon turned into something deeper: respect, laughter, and a friendship that would last decades. Their bond on and off the screen, the set of The Night of the Grizzly in 1966, wasn't just another job for Clint Walker and Jack Elam. For Clint, it was a chance to show that he could carry his heroic image from television to film. For Jack, it was an opportunity to step out of his usual villain roles and embrace something different: humor. Clint played the brave, quietly determined rancher Jim Cole, while Jack took on the role of Hank, the quirky sidekick who added warmth and levity to the story. Despite their differences in style and personality, something clicked between them. Clint, reserved and disciplined, admired Jack's looseness, his ability to turn even a tense moment into laughter. Jack, in turn, respected Clint's sense of integrity and the quiet professionalism he brought to every scene. What started as professional admiration grew into genuine friendship. Between takes, they'd swap stories, share jokes, and tease each other like old friends. People on set noticed the chemistry. Jack's unpredictable humor seemed to disarm Clint's seriousness. He'd pull little pranks, pretending to forget his lines or sneezing in the middle of a take just to make Clint break character. Clint rarely did, but when he did, his deep laugh could fill the entire set. After filming ended, their friendship didn't. They stayed in touch for decades, though both men preferred to keep their personal lives private. There were no magazine interviews or joint appearances, just phone calls, occasional visits, and an unspoken understanding that real friendship didn't need to be paraded in front of the world. By the 1970s, Clint and Jack's careers had taken different turns. Clint continued working steadily, appearing in The Dirty Dozen and several westerns, while also pursuing other interests like music and writing. Jack shifted more toward comedy, starring in Support Your Local Sheriff and Cannonball Run. But whenever people asked Clint about his co-stars, he always spoke of Jack with respect and affection. To him, Jack wasn't just a colleague. He was someone who understood the loneliness of the business, someone who could make the long, cold days on set feel a little less heavy. Their friendship endured quietly, away from headlines and gossip. And that's why, when Jack Elam passed away in 2003, people expected Clint to be there, to stand among the mourners, to say goodbye. Instead, his absence raised questions that would haunt fans for years. The day the news broke. When the news came in October 2003 that Jack Elam had passed away in Ashland, Oregon, at the age of 82, Hollywood reacted with quiet sorrow. For decades, Jack had been one of the most familiar faces in westerns, that unmistakable wandering eye, the crooked grin, and the raspy voice that could switch from menace to humor in an instant. To fans, he was immortal, the kind of character actor who never really faded from memory. But now, his long career, from the dusty sets of Gunsmoke to the gleeful chaos of Cannonball Run, had come to an end. News outlets published brief obituaries, recalling his rise from accountant to actor, his trademark lazy eye that became part of his legend, and his transformation from Hollywood villain to beloved comedian. Yet, for those who knew him personally, his death wasn't just the loss of a performer, it was the loss of a friend who could light up any room with a joke. Among them was Clint Walker. Clint had heard the news privately before the public did. Friends who knew both men said that the call hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Jack had been more than just a co-star from the 1960s. He had been one of the few people Clint had genuinely trusted in the unpredictable world of Hollywood. They had shared laughter, personal stories, and quiet understanding. Losing Jack was like losing a piece of his own past, one that reminded him of the golden age of westerns and the camaraderie that came with it. When Jack's funeral was announced, fans expected to see Clint among the attendees. Reporters assumed he would make the trip, perhaps deliver a short eulogy or stand by Jack's family as a final gesture of respect. But when the day came, Clint wasn't there. The cameras scanned the crowd, the names were read, but the tall figure of the legendary cowboy was nowhere in sight. Rumors began almost immediately. Some said Clint was angry at Jack over an old disagreement. Others whispered that he had grown distant in his later years. None of it was true. The real reason for his absence wasn't rooted in bitterness or neglect. It was rooted in something far more human, far more tragic. Behind the silence, Clint was fighting a battle of his own, one that few outside his close circle truly understood. A heart too fragile. By the time Jack Elam passed away in 2003, Clint Walker was 76 years old and already living a quieter life far from Hollywood. He and his wife, Susan Cavallari, had settled in Grass Valley, California, a peaceful town tucked away in the Sierra Nevada foothills. To the public, Clint seemed healthy and serene, a retired legend enjoying his twilight years. But beneath that calm exterior was a man who had been carrying the scars of one of the most extraordinary and terrifying moments in Hollywood history. More than 3 decades earlier, in May 1971, Clint had nearly died. He was skiing at Mammoth Mountain when a freak accident changed his life forever. Losing control on a steep slope, he fell violently, and one of his ski poles pierced his chest, straight through his heart. For a few brief moments, Clint Walker was clinically dead. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but doctors initially pronounced him gone. Then, in what seemed like a miracle, a faint heartbeat was detected. Emergency surgeons worked frantically to repair the damage, and against all odds, he survived. Within 2 months, Clint was back to work, performing his own stunts and playing the kind of fearless heroes that had made him famous. But the truth was, his heart had never been the same. For the rest of his life, Clint lived with a weakened heart and the constant warning from doctors to avoid emotional or physical strain. Funerals, in particular, were something he was told to stay away from. The combination of grief, stress, and travel could trigger another cardiac episode. By the early 2000s, those warnings had become more serious. Even small amounts of exertion could leave him fatigued. So when the news of Jack's funeral arrived, Clint was faced with an agonizing choice. Every instinct told him to go, to stand by the coffin, to say goodbye to his old friend, to honor their years of laughter and loyalty. But his doctors and even his wife reminded him of the risk. It wasn't just about discomfort, it was about survival. For Clint, that decision wasn't an act of neglect. It was a matter of life and death. To attend would have meant defying medical advice and possibly never coming home. To stay away meant living with a heartbreak he could never fully mend. In the end, Clint made the choice that would keep him alive. But it came at a cost he would carry for the rest of his days. The weight of absence. Clint Walker's absence from Jack Elam's funeral didn't go unnoticed. For those who had watched them share the screen, their friendship seemed too deep for one to miss the other's final farewell. Fans wrote letters, columnists speculated, and whispers spread through the tight-knit Western community. But Clint, never one for public explanations, stayed silent. He let people talk. He always had. Yet behind closed doors, those who knew him best said the decision tore him apart. He had lost friends before, co-stars, colleagues, people he admired. But this felt different. Jack wasn't just another actor from a shared era. He was someone who had seen Clint not as the towering cowboy or the strong, silent type, but as a man. Someone who had made him laugh when life had turned serious, who had lightened long shooting days with mischief and humor. And Clint carried those memories with him. One story he often told was about the day Jack showed up on set pretending to have a terrible cold. He sneezed loudly, coughed dramatically, and faked misery so convincingly that everyone kept their distance. What no one knew was that Jack had a cup of warm water hidden in his hand. Every time he faked a sneeze near a young stand-in actress, he flicked a few drops of water her way, making her think she'd been sprayed. She panicked, grabbed an umbrella, and opened it right there between them. When she realized it was all a prank, the set erupted in laughter. Even Clint, who rarely broke character, couldn't stop laughing. "That was Jack," Clint would later say, smiling softly. "He could make anyone laugh, even when you didn't want to." After Jack's death, Clint revisited those memories often. Instead of attending the funeral, he spent that day in quiet reflection at his home in Grass Valley. He didn't speak publicly about it for years, but he confided in a few close friends that staying away had been the hardest decision of his life. He said that if Jack were alive, he would have understood. "He wouldn't want me to risk it," Clint said once. "He'd just want me to remember him. The good times, the laughter. That's what he'd want." And that's exactly what Clint did. While the world mourned publicly, he chose a private farewell, not with words or tears, but with memories. It was his way of honoring Jack, quietly and faithfully, the same way he had lived much of his own life. Breaking the silence. For years after Jack Elam's death, Clint Walker remained silent about their friendship and the pain of that final goodbye. He wasn't the kind of man to chase attention or feed rumors. His life after Hollywood had been built on peace, privacy, and gratitude. But as the years passed, fans continued to ask, and the question never seemed to fade. Why wasn't Clint there? Eventually, in one of his last interviews before his own death in 2018, Clint decided to speak. His voice, even at 90, was deep and deliberate, the same calm tone that once narrated countless westerns. "Jack was a real character," he said with a faint smile, "and I mean that in every sense of the word." The interviewer waited, but Clint wasn't rushing. He began to share stories that no one had heard before, about laughter, loyalty, and the strange, beautiful unpredictability that defined Jack Elam. He talked about how Jack could walk into a tense set and within minutes turn it into a room full of laughter. You never quite knew what Jack was going to do, Clint said, chuckling. But you could bet it'd be entertaining. He recalled the way Jack could steal a scene with just a glance or a single muttered line, and how every director who worked with him knew they were getting something special, even if it wasn't in the script. When Clint was asked if they had ever fallen out, he shook his head. No, never. We didn't always see each other. Life gets in the way. But we never had bad blood. He was my friend. Then, for the first time publicly, Clint addressed the question everyone had wondered about for 2 decades. I couldn't go to his funeral, he said quietly. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But my doctors told me it would be too much. My heart couldn't take it. And I knew Jack. He'd have told me not to risk it. The room was silent for a long moment before Clint added almost to himself, there'll never be another like him. That interview, brief but heartfelt, became his final word on the subject, not a defense, but a confession of affection. It revealed the truth that had always been there, hidden beneath years of speculation. Clint hadn't stayed away out of indifference. He had stayed away out of love, the kind of love that doesn't need an audience, the kind that endures even in silence. In the end, Clint Walker and Jack Elam's story isn't about absence. It's about devotion. 2 men who spent their lives playing larger-than-life characters but remained humble, loyal, and deeply human beneath the spotlight. Clint may not have stood at his friend's graveside, but he carried Jack's laughter, his mischief, and his friendship in his heart until the very end. Sometimes, love doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. What do you think about Clint's decision? Was it the right choice to protect his health, or would you have risked it to say one final goodbye? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden age.